Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum. Today I am here for the course title African Literature. And the topic that I'm going to represent today in front of you is comparative analysis of Things Fall Apart and The Lion and the Jew. So it's the comparative analysis of both these novels. So here is the introduction. The introduction is about both the novels as this topic is a comparative analysis. So born just 4 years apart, the two Nigerian writers Chinua Achebe and Wole have defined African culture with their different poems and different plays and novels and for more than half a century, and they are simultaneously similar and distinct. And Brody says that they share an index of national historical phenomena from the history of colonization and independence, which came to Nigeria in 1960, to the continued political struggles. Things Fall Apart is the realistical representation of some African beliefs, some African practices, and also norms which are worthy of withholding and communication to other African societies in the diaspora. So, the prevailing tone of the novel is ironic and tragic and also satirical and to some extent fable like, by which Achebe exposes the severe existentialism of African culture, tradition, and also individualism. So, in essence, Things Fall Apart is pretty much an assorted pack. Chinua Achebe presents his audience with an interesting twist to a contemporary school of thought in his novel, and this post-colonization narrative incorporates several traits that revolt against normative philosophic system and theories and beliefs of the existence of man and his place in the universe. And in the second play, The Lion and the Jewel, there is a confrontation between the tradition and modernity. The researcher, the writer relates the modernity to the influence of British culture on Nigerian way of life. So the conflict has a as it's a comparative analysis. So the conflict has different sides. It may be a result of a generation gap, or education, or age, or mind and belief. And the conflict may exist among the different characters themselves. So, as the main theme of Soyinka is the conflict between tradition and modernity, the play shows the intimacy of Soyinka and with the various aspects of African traditions. And on the one hand, the play also shows the influence of the modern world on the African mind. And on the other hand, the play also put focuses on the failure of an elementary school teacher to apprehend the sense of culture and advancement. So it was the introduction about the topic, about the two novels. Representation of ideology. Achebe's style, although peculiar in one sense, can be defined in relation to the school of philosophic thought known as existentialism. And some of Obrikia's musings are particularly existential, particularly when Ogno, who is banned from the tribe for 7 years for the accidental murder of a clansman. He also laments about the custom of killing and and it creating twins among other traditions that don't entirely make sense but are done out of tradition and trust in older generations. So Achebe addresses a variety of issues, a number of issues, including child raising and dealing with European colonialism and cultural pride. So likewise, Soyinka seeks to satisfy her thirst for Afrocentricity by applying many methods which are in African origin. So in this play, The Lion and the Jew, the play draws on Nigerian traditional poetry and music in dance. So it is needless to say that this play enabled the Nigerian drama to become part of the world theatre, and he introduces two male characters, and by them he introduces two world views, the Afrocentric view and the Eurocentric view, and hence this play turns to be a kind of ideological war between these two poles. And furthermore, Sovinica adds another important character, and that was female character, to mediate the conflict. So in Wole Soyinka's play, we find the essence of African culture and also the essence of tradition, which is not demolished by the domination of British Empire. And the character of this drama show the core essence of livelihood of the people of Nigeria. And the next is use of language. So the use of language in both these dramas, African dramas, was also different in demonstrating the imaginative, often formal language of the Igbo. Achebe emphasizes that Africa is not the silent, or we can say that incomprehensible continent that books such as the Heart of Darkness made it out to be. So rather, by spackling the novel with Igbo words, Achebe shows that the Igbo language is too complex for direct translation into English. So similarly, Igbo culture cannot be understood within the framework of European colonialist values, and Achebe also points out that Africa has many different languages and different forms of languages, different accents of languages exist in Africa. The villagers of Umpea, for example, make fun of Mr. Brown's translator because his language is slightly different from their own. And it is intensely significant that both Achebe and Swinika choose to write Things Fall Apart and The Lion and the Jew, respectively, in English, because they clearly intended that their literary works to be read and the West at least as much. So they want that their literary works were read by the West, so that's why they choose the English medium as a tool for communication. And Soyinka also presents his Yoruba language as musical, which is also considered to be chanted rather than spoken. And the wealth of images and proverbs and folkloric motifs survive the transplantation of foreign forms of Swinika work. So their goal was to evaluate and alter the portrait of Africa that was smothered by so many writers of the colonial period. So doing so required the use of English, the language of those colonial writers. And these both of these colonial writers want that English people read their novels more as compared to Nigerian. So, though their inclusion of proverbs and folk tales and songs translated from the Igbo language, Achebe and Soyinka managed Both these writers managed to capture and convey the rhythms and structures and beauty of the Igbo language. So thus, and these two authors also, we can say, expose their vehement attitude towards African existentialism in the outer world. And the next point is use of proverbs, or we can say idioms. In Achebe's culture, they used proverbs. Why? In order to communicate. And they also use a more elevated style to be clear and to make and they want to make vocabulary more interesting. So for to create an interesting vocabulary, they use different sort of proverbs. A few examples of these proverbs can be illustrated here. Like in chapter number, I will explain all these examples one by one. Like in chapter number 1, Yunuga uses a phrase to say that he will pay his biggest debtors before the smallest in this proverb. So our elders say that the sun will shine on those who stand before it shines on those who kneel under them. And also in chapter 4, we get a proverb that those whose palm kernels were cracked for them by a benevolent spirit should not forget to be humble. So it means that people who are blessed with luck by the gods and should be humble and do not criticize other people. So in chapter number 4, we find a moral proverb that a child's fingers are not scalded by a piece of hot yam which its mother puts into its palm. So it signifies the fact that the children obeying their mother are not usually punished. In chapter 16, we found another proverb, and that was, we get another truth that if one's power is too great, things next to it will not have enough room to grow properly. So Achebe depicts this phrase as living fire begets cold, impotent ash. He means the fact that because of Ogno's great aptitude, his son could not become great. So they use different types of different kinds of proverbs. So towards the end of the play, Baraka is attempting to woo Sidi and show her the machine that makes stamps. And he also tells Sidi that her image will adorn each stamp, leaving il jingle. So then expresses his thoughts about the progress and about the modernity. So CD mentions that Baraka sounds like the school teacher, and Baraka says that the proof of wisdom is to wish to learn even from children, and the haste of youth must learn its temper from the blows of ancient leader and from a strength knit close along the grain. So when Sidi is speaking with Baraka, Baraka mentions that his favorite wife had harmed him, and Sidi asked if his wife was in any way dissatisfied. Baraka initially comments that he does not have time to worry about what upsets women, then changes his tone and tells Sidi to not make him feel like an old ram, and he tells Sidi that he will not allow her to watch him wrestle, and references in African proverbs by saying that and the woman gets lost in the woods and day, and every wood deity dies the next Soyinka. So our next point is post-colonial perspective, post-colonial themes. Alteration of convention is a very important theme in Things Fall Apart. As a story about a culture on the verge of change, the novel deals with how the prospect and how the reality of change affects various characters, and the tension about whether change should be privileged over tradition often involves questions of personal status. So, Okonoko, for example, resists the new political and religious orders because he feels that they are not mainly, and that he himself will not be mainly if he consents to join for even endure them. To some extent, confrontation of cultural change is also due to his fear of losing a sociological existence. So his sense of self-worth is dependent upon the traditional standards by which society judges him. And throughout the novel, Achebe shows how reliant such traditions are upon storytelling and language, and thus how quickly the decision of the Igbo language for English could lead to the abolition of these rituals. And the most important theme of The Lion and the Jewel is the rapid modernization of Africa, coupled with the rapid evangelization of the population. And this has driven a trunk between the conservatives and the modernists who like to see the last of obsolete customary credence in any way. And this ideology also depicts author's post-colonial attitude vividly. So there is also the conflict between education and also the traditional beliefs. So conflict arises between education and traditional beliefs, and finally, there is the importance of song and dance, and as a form of spreading information in a world so where the fastest route of communication is by foot. So it is attempt to uphold their conventional culture and tradition before the post-colonial world. So the next point is about depiction of woman, a factor that hastens the decline of the traditional Igbo society is their custom of marginalization some of their people, allowing the existence of an outcast group and keeping women subservient in their household and community involvement, treating them as a property, and accepting corporal abuse of them somewhat frivolously. So, when delegates of a foreign culture enter Igbo province and accept these marginalized people, including the twins at their full human value, the Igbo's traditional shared their guidance and finds itself unable to control its whole population. So the lack of a clear sustaining center of authority in Igbo society may be the quality that decided Achebe to draw his title from Yeats' poem The Second Coming. So the key phrase of the poem reads, "Things fall apart, the center cannot hold." Soyinka's play also has this theme of marginalization of women as property. In those days, at that time period, woman was considered as a property, and traditionally they were seen as properties that could be bought, sold, or accumulated. So at that time period, there was no respect of a woman, and she was treated as a slave, and women couldn't have any right. Women couldn't enjoy any right, and she was only born to bought, sold, or accumulated. And even the modern people also falls victim to this by looking down on city for having a smaller brain, and later by thinking it will be easier to marry her once she lost her virginity, since no dowry was required in such a situation. So a woman was treated very badly in that time period, and people think that a woman is their personal property, and they can do whatever they want, and there was no respect of women, and there was no social status of women, and also there was no freedom for women, and women couldn't enjoy any freedom, any right, and the only thing that woman was considered in those days was that she is only a property, and that can be bought, that can be sold, or that can be accumulated. So this was the status of a woman at that time period, and in this way the woman was depicted by the writers, by the different African writers, because it's a fact, it's a reality that African writers showed in their writings the depiction of women, because the woman was depicted very badly. Woman was treated very badly in those days, in that time period, in that specific time period when there was on the only slavery was for women. And the next point is about religious beliefs. The concept of race discussed at various points throughout the novel. Things fall apart and is important to our understanding of Oknoko as the tragic hero. So the tree is an individual personal god, whose on merit is determined by the individual's good fortune or lack thereof. So, along the lines of this interpretation, one can explain tragic fate as the result of problematic tree, a thought that occurs to Ogunko at several points in the novel. So Achebe shows that Igbo religious authorities such as the oracle seem to possess uncanny insights, and he approaches the matter of Igbo religion with a sense of wonder, and the Igbo gods are mostly manifestations of nature, and the elements of nature, which makes sense because they are agriculture. They are an agriculture society that only depends on the uh, regularity of seasons and also natural phenomena to survive. So the worship the goddess of the earth and are always careful to avoid committing sins against her for fear of vengeance that might wipe out an entire generation. So such concept of personal gods is also found in the Soyinkas, the Lion and the Jewel, and the Orisha or individual gods may be conceived either as a deified ancestor, or they perceived as a conceived as a, we can say that natural a nature force, and as minions or manifestations of the supreme being, and or as all of these as need and convenience dictate. So in both of the novels, in both these novels, and novel and the play, we found that most of the interactions occur to show respect to some external being, an other man, an ancestral spirit, or a god. And respect and knowledge of one's role in society is very important in determining such customs. So again, respect was very important factor for the people. If someone wants that their customs circulate in the society, their rules circulate in the society, it was very important that the person should be respectable person in the society. So the next point is about traditional outlook. And Soyinka also has an allegorical perspective in his play, and he's one of the major characters. CD represents the Nigerian people who are desirous to trust the ineffectiveness of the past, but eventually experience its power. The bale represents the centuries of traditions that extend into the present. The memes, which take place twice in the play, present flashbacks that give the play added historical depth. And the play's energetic combination of dance, song, and comic dialogue and dialogue reinforces its themes. So Svinika shows a passionate concern for society, and she shows her concern for society by seeking freedom for all. And his ideas are not only African, however, his characters and mannerisms are African, but his people represent the whole race. And although many characters are potential victims of their own ingenuity, his heroes are marked ultimately by their keyless trimming, and thus Suvinika shows his attitude to be etymological about African culture and African tradition. So this matter is also depicted through the rejection of Lacan's interest for the Western culture and style by other natives. Similarly, Achebe also uploads his tradition and culture, and one of the most notable Igbo traditions is found in the right of passengers for young girls and for young boys maturing into adulthood. So this scarment of passage is not a sudden acceptance into adulthood, but rather it's a series of rites they must go through, overcome before they become a true adult. And only 8 days before birth, a child goes through the rite of circumcision. So every boy and girl must be circumcised in order to be the part of the Igbo culture. And boys and girls must complete the assortment of wearing different stuffs, and this necessitates going from wearing nothing to being completely covered in clothes, and signifies social status and as well as individual improvement of transformation. So these were some traditional these were their traditions. So the next rite of passenger is fattening a girl before marriage. This practice is believed to support enthusiastic children as well as hearty marriage. So Ituanaya, which means that fattening a girl, is the fourth ritual of passage, durable for 8 days, where one becomes a heavenlier, and throughout this period, the kid thinks, reflects, and even communicates with spirits, so as to gain the power, knowledge, and audacity that is compulsory to turn out to be a heavenlier, the last rite of passage for a child in Igbo culture is Igba Megba, or it means wrestling. So, in this bustle, one shows his sport on strength and courage, and with success he becomes a real warrior and in turn a man. So it was the traditional outlook, it was the tradition that exists in that specific society in that time period or in that era. So here is the conclusion about the lecture we discussed today. So this topic is to the purpose of this topic is to demonstrate the clash between the African black culture represented the Igbo tribe and the white one enforced by the British expansionism. So the majesty of Achebe and Soyinka existed in the vivid description of place, conventions, and also the people, and they were able to show the inner conflict that took place inside the key characters in their quest of mere presence within the declining cultures in the face of a tyrannical white one. In both, and things fall apart and Line and the Jew. Both the writers have showed their post-colonial attitude to uphold their own societal culture and their own tradition in a formal way. So the existential defiance is found in both of their works. And the play The Lion and the Jewel has an allegorical level because where CD represents the Nigerian people who are anxious to have faith in the impotence of the past, but ultimately experience its supremacy. And the bale denotes the centuries of convention that outspread into the contemporary. Similarly, in Things Fall Apart, also we find at this strong appeal to depict the existentialistic panorama through the major character Oknuko. Therefore, it can be said that both Achebe and Soyinka have shown a passionate concern for their society, seeking freedom for all. Both of these writers seeking freedom for all the Nigerian and for all the black and for all white people. And the ideas are not only African, nevertheless their characters and mannerisms are also African, and their people represent the whole race. Although many characters are potential victims of their own ingenuity, their heroes are marked ultimately by their ceaseless striving. And the assertion depicts the comparative existential attitude of Chinua and Wole with reference to the major literary work Things Fall Apart and The Lion and the Jewel respectively. And they show African rustic life that explores the conflict between traditional and the modern values, third world authenticity against first world principles, and the power of invaders against the colonized. And they both depict the post-colonial Africa where modernity and tradition are in constant conflict, and thus they create characters challenging themselves and in an atmosphere interspread with the wardens of modernism in one fiction, faction, and those who are deeply rooted in the traditions and customs on the other flank. So here are the references from where the data was collected and represented in this lecture in front of you people. Thank you so much. Hope so you all have clear concept about the lecture. Stay blessed. Allah Hafiz.